If you were to ask me what my favorite gaming platform of all time is, I wouldn't exactly be able to provide a straightforward answer, as I wouldn't be able to choose just one. I have three favorites, those being the Commodore Amiga, preferably the 500 model, Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo GameCube, with the GameCube being the one that I know the most about. It was the first console that I owned, and seeing how I love the thing so much, it's no surprise to me that this is the case. I've also played every exclusive in its library that has been released in North America and Europe. Yeah, at the moment I'm kind of avoiding the Japan-only games to preserve what little sanity I have left. So with that said, I thought it would be a good idea to make a list of my favorites. Not the best, just my favorites. There are games in the GameCube's library that I'm not exactly in the position to evaluate. For instance, I'm not much of an RPG person, so it wouldn't be fair for me to judge games like Baten Kaitos and Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2. I should also elaborate on what I mean by exclusive titles. I'm not just going by the Only 4 banner, seeing how it's not always right. To be more specific, no multi-platform games, ports, remakes, or games that were exclusive to the GameCube in North America, but were on other consoles in other regions. This excludes games like Animal Crossing, Doshin the Giant, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, Resident Evil 4, Metal Gear Solid, Soul Calibur 2, Ocarina of Time, and even my favorite game of the whole generation, Pac-Man World 2. So without further ado, here are my favorite GameCube exclusives. Number 20. Let's start with a holy grail of sorts among GameCube collectors, Chibi-Robo Survival of the Fittest. It started off as a game for the Nintendo 64 disk drive, but development shifted towards the GameCube, which would explain why it's not one of the better looking GameCube games. Unfortunately, the game is quite rare, and even used copies in questionable condition usually go for over $90. However, enough background, let's talk about the game itself. It's hard to categorize it in a single genre, but that's primarily what I do like about it. You play as a pig, going around fighting other animals and mutating yourself. Each mutation will affect your abilities. After a while, you will mate and pass on your genes. After this, you play as your descendant, as your predecessor will die in succession. This will repeat in a cycle throughout the game until you are fit enough to conquer Killer Chibi-Robo, who has taken the wilderness away from the land, and thus it is your job to restore it. The game is pretty repetitive, but I honestly don't mind seeing how the game is so unique and interesting. I would at least recommend downloading it and playing it through the homebrew channel on the Wii, or through emulation if you're interested. It's a shame that it's so rare, because for what it is very good. It's a game that I would like to see have a re-release of some kind. Number 19. Now here's a game that surprised me. I'm not much of a sports game person, but I found myself really enjoying 1080 Degrees Avalanche. It's a snowboarding game that focuses less on performing tricks and more so on racing. The game is actually pretty varied, as there's racing against numerous opponents, a single opponent, against the clock, and even an avalanche as the name would suggest. And that's just going by the single player experience. The tracks themselves are actually pretty imaginative and fun to navigate. The emphasis on alternate routes helps things too. Overall, even if you're not much of a sports person and you want to play something else on the GameCube, I'd actually recommend this. Number 18. Here's yet another game that surprised me, Chibi-Robo Plug-Into Adventure. In this game, you play as a small robot that was a present at a birthday party, and it is your job to make the residents of your new home happy. You do this by collecting items, cleaning up, organizing, and so on. So what separates something like this from, say, Universal Studios Theme Park Adventures? Well, for starters, it's fun to explore the Sandersons' home, and doing this enough will grant you new abilities, which will allow you to access new areas, and this ties really well with the game's core interactions. Also, they make it fun. I don't know how they did it, but they did. It's legitimately entertaining. I also really like the sense of scale with what we recognize as small things being huge. It really reminds me of Toy Story 2 in that regard. Another neat touch that really helps give depth to the gameplay is the battery meter. You'll gradually lose power, and walking, climbing, and interacting will drain it at a faster rate. Thankfully, there are outlets scattered across the house for you to plug into, which will restore your battery and allow you to save. It took a few minutes for me to really get into it, but in the end, I found myself really engaged and I had a lot of fun playing it. Number 17. Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg is a game that I've talked about before. It's a 3D platform where you play as a boy in a chicken suit, rolling eggs around, making them bigger by collecting fruit, using them to attack enemies, and to traverse the stages. You may have noticed the primary thing that draws me to this game, that being that it's weird. Really, really awesomely weird. I really like the ways that they play around with the concept, and it's also no cakewalk. It does get challenging. Granted, sometimes not for the right reasons, like falling off a ledge with your egg on top of that ledge, leaving you to either wait for the egg to break or find another one, but I'd much rather take that than falling through holes that you can't see after a gratuitously difficult platforming section that's only difficult because the camera's positioned so badly that it becomes hard to tell where you are in relation to your surroundings. However, in the end, I still see it as a fairly unique, bizarre, and competently put together game that I would recommend to fans of the genre. Number 16. Now, I'm not really a horror fan at all, but Eternal Darkness really, really impressed me. The premise is unbelievable. The famous sanity meter mechanic is brilliant and is very well implemented. The story is amazing. The characters are fantastic. The voice acting is spot on. The music is some of the best on the system, and it's just a brilliant game overall. If I had any problems with the game, it would be that the puzzle solving bothers me. In any form of thought-based gameplay, the mental exercise should come from how you respond to the variables that have been established. To provide analogy, you can't be realistically expected to put a traditional puzzle together if the pieces are invisible and scattered around the room. In short, the game doesn't always establish the variables very well. If it wasn't for this issue, this game would be in the top 5 at least. In every other regard, the game isn't just good, it's genius. I would talk more about the good stuff, but I'd get into heavy spoiler territory, and I really don't want to spoil too much. At minimum, watch the cutscenes on YouTube. Number 15. Now, if I were making a top 20 best GameCube games list, Metroid Prime would probably be number 1. However, I have established that while I admire it and respect it to no end, it's not the sort of game that I pop in if I'm just looking for a fun time. Despite that, the game isn't just good, it's incredibly good. This game has you explore and navigate a huge world, solving puzzles, upgrading your suit, allowing you to access otherwise inaccessible areas, and thus progress through the game. The atmosphere in the game is just phenomenal, and exploring these environments is definitely an engaging experience. There are a lot of points where the game gets pretty intense, but it breaks things up a bit by having some more quiet and wide open parts, allowing you to just breathe for a while and freely explore. As you would imagine, I love parts like this, especially Finanja Drifts, and I can't bring up that environment without bringing up the music. The only problem that I have with the game is some of the backtracking getting out of hand, but overall I found myself really, really impressed with this game, and I definitely recommend trying it out. Number 14. As I've said before, I'm generally not into RPGs. Does that mean that I hate every game in the genre? Absolutely not. If that were the case, I wouldn't have had this game on the list. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is a very fun and engaging game that I feel anyone could play and potentially get into. It has some great environments that are fun to traverse, really memorable music, good characters, a surprisingly adequate storyline considering that this is a Mario game, and some inventive level design. I really like the powers you're given through quote-unquote being cursed, and how the game plays around with them, and even some of the puzzle solving is pretty good. There are some annoying parts though, like the tree with the punies and that stupid cave. But otherwise, I had a lot of fun with this, even as someone who isn't a fan of the genre. If you are a fan of the genre, of course there are other games to look into as well, so I can't even really say that this is the best RPG on the system. However, it is the one that I had the most fun with. Number 13. Geist is a very interesting game. You play as someone who's been stripped from their human body, leaving them as a ghost. As this ghost, you can possess people, animals, paint cans, explosives, and pretty much anything you can come up with. This, of course, translates into a very healthy balance of first-person shooting action and brain-teasing puzzles. In fact, there are quite a few times where both elements are present at the same time. Like with this boss fight where you have to alternate between possessing a soldier and grenades being thrown at you. The game has been classified by some as a thinking man's first-person shooter, and that's exactly what it is. Are there a few times where it gets a little too cryptic for its own good? Yes, absolutely, but it makes up for that with some very well executed game mechanics and level design, as well as its tone. I just feel really motivated to get further and further into this game every time I play it, and the music really helps with that. It's one of the better soundtracks on the system. I really like this game, and if you're looking for another GameCube title to sink your teeth into, well, figuratively at least, literally that would be disgusting, then I'd say that this is a good one to look into. Number 12. FZero GX has an interesting reputation. It's overall pretty positive, but it's well known for being ridiculously difficult. I, of course, went to this game very cocky. I have beaten Contra without the Konami code, I have beaten all of the Turrican and Rogue Squadron games, I've even beaten Rendering Ranger, a game that is often noted for being insanely tough. So I turned on this game, picked up the controller, and my ass was subsequently handed to me. This game is exceptionally difficult, but also intriguingly satisfying. The graphics and sound are very well done for the system, the level design is very well done but it can get really sadistic sometimes, and the story mode, good luck beating it. However, aside from its difficulty, it delivers on all of the areas that you would hope a 6th-gen F-Zero game would, if not even more so. It's very engaging and fun to play, and I actually like it more than F-Zero X on the N64. It's up there with the original Super Nintendo game for me, though I like the original just slightly more. Number 11. All of the time you hear Nintendo fanboys cry out in unison that Luigis Mansion is hands down, indisputably, nobody can say otherwise, that this is the most underrated game of all time. Quite frankly, given the presence of groupthink in the gaming community, as well as how badly games are evaluated, in addition to the game's decent scores at the time and very positive reputation now, I think this claim is absolutely ludicrous. Also, they don't seem to understand that if everybody is saying the same game is underrated, that means that it's no longer underrated. I mean, keep in mind, this is the game that is always number 1 of every top 10 or 11 underrated games list. Moving on, despite all of that, I think it's a very well done and interesting title. However, let's ignore the insanity of the Nintendo fanboys and just look at the game on its own. You play as our titular plumber, navigating all of the rooms of a large mysterious mansion, interacting with your surroundings, collecting all of the parlor ghosts in your vacuum, and even 50 boos. I personally find the problem solving involving certain puzzles, as well as how to capture each ghost, to be very well handled and very engaging. For me, that's what makes this game. Would I say it's on par with the Haunted Mansion? Not quite. But again, this is a list of GameCube exclusives, not multi-platform games. Do I think it's anywhere near as underrated as games like Lair and the Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures games? Absolutely not. But for what it is very good, and it does deserve praise. Join me in part 2 where I'll talk about my top 10 favorites, and I'd very much like to hear some of yours. With that said, thanks for watching.